Welcome to AppStories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Casper and iTube Downloader. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How are you?
Good. I wish I could say that we're all the way through our big 10th anniversary of the App Store coverage, but we're almost there. But we've got a few days to go as we record this, but it's been a lot of fun. What do you think?
I think it's been awesome to see, people sharing all kinds of retrospectives about the App Store and sharing their favorite memories about the early apps and games. And I think people have responded really well to the work that we put into this series, and both on MacStories and on AppStories. I think people are appreciating the many months of planning that went into the stories that we each put together for the website and the episodes and the interviews that we've done. It's been exhausting, honestly, but it's been a lot of fun to be talking to all kinds of different people and seeing the reaction on Twitter of developers and users of apps sharing links to our stories and sharing their own personal memories about the App Store has been really fun.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that too. And, I suppose it didn't help that you and I traveled off to the UK for several days right before we launched the big project. But that's part of what I wanted to talk about today. Not that we were traveling, but how we dealt with this big project, especially since we had some, I guess, unusual constraints in that we were preparing while we were dealing with things like WWC and traveling to the UK for Mike's wedding and a bunch of other things. And I thought it might be interesting to go through and talk about some of the apps that we use and how we use the apps that we've probably talked about before too, and explain how they kind of got us through this process. Because as you mentioned, it's something that we've been working on in one way or another since the beginning of the year. And I think I went back and looked, and I think it started, you obviously thought about this over the holidays, and we talked about it early sometime in 2018. But I think it really got kicked off when we created a shared note in the Notes app and started brainstorming what the topics would be, who we'd interview, and that sort of thing.
Right, and initially we were using the shared note, which is something that we do all the time when we need to collaborate on a big idea or on a project that has multiple aspects. There's the research phase, there's a getting in touch with people, there's the business angle, of course, there's the editorial side. And using shared note is something that we do often for MacStories. And in fact, I wanted to say that the things we're going to discuss today are techniques and apps and little tricks that we use for this particular project. But I think in general they will be applicable to all kinds of big projects that we will launch on MacStories and AppStories going forward. Especially, for example, the coverage of Apple and all of their OS updates this fall.
Right.
Anyway, the shared note. Initially, we structured the note with multiple sections. So, in Notes, you can create multiple headings for sections. And I remember there was a list of developers that we wanted to contact, a list of possible business ideas for how to make this project work from a financial perspective. And then we started planning how to split up the articles that we wanted to have on the site. And eventually from there, I think when we got Ryan involved, sometime in the spring, I think Ryan maybe enabled the highlight changes feature of Notes,
right,
which allows you to see what the last person that made changes in the note is, which is not perfect. Sometimes it highlights too many changes or too little changes from...
Right, I did see that a couple of times.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but it gets most of the job done. And I wanted to mention also that about sharing notes. The system that Apple uses is CloudKit. It's the same service that is available to third-party developers to sync with iCloud and to enable sharing and collaboration with other people using iCloud. And something that I do all the time with Notes is not only do I share Notes with people, but I also share Notes with myself so that I can use the link, the iCloud.com link, as a launcher for a specific note. So I can put the link to for example, I have a task in things called prepare and finish, two separate tasks, AppStories show notes. And in the note field of each task, there's a link to an iCloud.com shared note that only I have access to. And it's where I keep all of my ideas and links for AppStories. So I use it as a launcher to quickly get back into Notes.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, I know we've mentioned that on Club MacStories before. And it's one of those things that is just not obvious, but sharing with yourself does give you that link, and the link is what can facilitate that sort of thing,
Yeah.
dropping into task managers and the like. So I think that this project in particular came together relatively quickly once we had that shared note. I think we came up with the rough outline of what we were going to do pretty quickly, but then we had a bunch of other things to do. And one of the things before we even start writing is research. And this is something that's applicable not just to this 10th anniversary coverage, but as you said, bigger projects like the iOS review, the macOS review, the things we're going to do in the fall. And you and I have been doing research a little bit differently. I've been using DevonThink, and especially for the 10th anniversary coverage, I use DevonThink on the Mac because one of the first things I did was I went through every single story on MacStories from the beginning of time that was tagged App Store.
Wow.
And yeah, it took a while. That was a long Sunday afternoon, and I just was dumping them into DevonThink without doing a whole lot of reading, just making sure they were relevant, dumping them in there. And I had a few categories because I already had in my head the topics we were going to do. And as I did it, I would come across things that were topics that Ryan was going to handle, or you were going to handle, or somebody else. And so I would kind of drop them into the different buckets. And then I went back through, organized it a little better, shared some of that other information with you and Ryan, the things that were relevant to what you were doing. And then when I really got down to figuring out what I was going to write for different stories, I would go through and kind of revisit each one of those articles. And because I saved them as web archives on the Mac, I could highlight sections of these articles, which was super valuable because I have, like when I did the business of selling apps on the App Store article, I had a whole bunch of articles related to, I guess, statistics, various analytics companies that had come up with statistics about how money is made on the App Store and how many apps there are on the App Store, all that kind of thing. And it was very helpful to be able to do two things. One, scan an article and very quickly see what I had highlighted as important. And then two, use DevonThink's powerful search to find things that I remembered were in the database, but wasn't sure, because I think at the end of the day, I had roughly 170 articles in that economics database. And those were a mixture of MacStories articles, but a bunch of other research, more general research that I did on other sites. So those two things, and Devon Agent, which is another Devon Technologies app for searching the web, it searches both your DevonThink database and the web to find similar related articles. Both of those were super valuable for finding information.
So how does this work? Because I've always been curious about Devon Agent, and I think I asked you a while back, and I think I forgot what your explanation was. So you archive articles as web archives in DevonThink. Then you open Devon Agent, and what happens there?
Yeah, they integrate with each other, and there's a couple of different things. Like with DevonThink, there's a little icon that's like a magician's top hat, and you click on that, and it will take whatever you're looking at, and it will find related things in your database and related things on the web, which is probably the most handy. And then Devon Agent, you can use it just as a browser, and you can search using multiple search services. You can have Google, DuckDuckGo, Bing. You can do, and a lot of other more specialized ones, and you can search them all at once if you want. I didn't use that as much. I used Devon Agent as it was built in and coordinates with DevonThink to find what was already in my database more, or to take something like, I don't know, say I found an article that we wrote about WWC in 2015, and I could, find something on the web that mentioned similar things. And that was just a kind of a nice way to branch out and find other things on other sites that were relevant to what I was writing about.
Right. Interesting. So in DevonThink, you have all of these hundreds of articles archived. Are you using folders? Are you using tags? Are you using comments to organize them? What kind of structure did you have for all of this material?
So it was primarily folders. I have a folder for each article that I was writing, and I didn't really did some tagging at one point just to kind of designate what I had looked at and what I hadn't looked at yet as I was reading through everything, because that took a little while. But I didn't really write a lot of comments or anything. It's mostly just my own personal database, which is nice because they're web archives, which means I've got that data on my computer. I don't have to worry about that site going away. Because one thing, when you're researching some of this old stuff from 10 years ago, there are a lot of dead links. And so now I've got all this information and it's not going anywhere. The one thing I wish I did have was the highlighting feature, but on iOS, because this was something I really could only do when I was sitting at my Mac. And I really do enjoy, if I'm reading, I don't want to really necessarily be tied to my desk. I'd rather, sit on the couch and maybe read through a dozen articles or something, but you can't do that highlighting when you're on an iOS device.
That's interesting, and I totally understand why, especially if you're using a Mac, you wanna use Devonthink and Devon Agent together.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by our friends at Casper. Casper is a company focused on sleep. They're dedicated to making you exceptionally comfortable one night at a time. Did you know that you spend a third of your life sleeping? It's true. That's a lot of time to spend doing one thing, and you should be comfortable. Really, it should be the best experience it can possibly be, which is why you need Casper. Casper mattresses are perfectly designed for humans, with engineering to soothe and support your natural geometry. Casper's mattresses have the perfect support in all the right places. So what goes into making a Casper mattress so comfortable? They combine multiple supportive memory foams. For a quality mattress with just the right sink and just the right bounce. Casper mattresses are designed and developed in the United States, and their breathable design helps to regulate your body temperature throughout the night, keeping you comfy and cozy all night long. And with over 20,000 reviews and an average rating of 4.8 stars, Casper is rapidly becoming the internet's favorite mattress. What's more, they deliver your mattress right to your door. It's super easy. And what's great is that you can be sure of your purchase with Casper's 100-night risk-free sleep-on-it trial. And if for any reason you don't love your mattress, Casper has a hassle-free return policy. We have a very special offer just for App Stories listeners. Right now, you can get $50 towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/appstories and using the code AppStories at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. That's casper.com/appstories and the offer code AppStories. We'll include a link in the show notes. This deal is a great way to get a better night's sleep and help support the show. Thanks so much for Casper for supporting App Stories.
I've been using Devonthink for almost a couple of years at this point, and earlier this year, just as I was putting together all of this research material for the App Store anniversary coverage, and I was thinking ahead at the iOS 12 and the iOS 12 review, and I was trying to, I was feeling some kind of discomfort with Devonthink, and I tried to understand why, and I realized that, looking back at iOS 11 last year and how I put together my iOS 11 review last year, I remembered some of the pain points with Devonthink, which were starting to surface again as I was putting together links and documents for the App Store's 10th anniversary, and I was starting to think about the iOS 12 review. I remember that, for example, in Devonthink, you get this powerful and super complex app on the Mac, but some of the best features are not accessible on iOS yet. And my understanding is that the developers of Devonthink are now focusing on a major update to the Mac app, and I don't know if the iOS version will continue to receive as much attention while they are working on the Mac stuff, because they're a small studio and there's only so much they can do. When they're focusing on a major update on the Mac,
Right.
Maybe iOS needs a little more time. But also, I was thinking about, how do I want to organize all of this stuff for my App Store preservation story, and how do I want to organize content for my iOS 12 review? And I realized I really want to have something that doesn't limit my organizational process to folders. I want to have something that is more similar to what you have on the Mac with smart folders or with saved searches, which are basically the same idea. And so I started looking around for Devonthink-like products that would allow me to have saved searches on iOS. And I finally came across an application that I actually did consider a while back before switching to Devonthink, and it's called Keep It. Now, Keep It is the new version of Together, and Together has been around for, I would say, for a decade, maybe on the Mac.
Yeah, very long time.
Very long time on the Mac. It's developed by Steve Harris. He runs Reinvented Software. I think it's based in the UK. And the new version is called Keep It, and it's both on the Mac and on iOS. And what sets Keep It apart is that it's got a very clean UI. So it uses many of the platform conventions. It looks like an Apple app. It looks like a combination of Finder and Apple Mail, basically. Looks native to iOS. It's got this native, almost default stock look that looks really nice, really clean, easy to understand. And it's entirely based on iCloud and specifically on CloudKit. So not only you don't need to set up any account because it just uses iCloud, but you can also share with the same UI, with the same system that you get in Apple Notes or you get in iCloud Drive. You can share files as well as entire folders with other people, which I don't think actually sharing folders is even supported in iCloud Drive, but you can do that and Keep It, which is actually pretty awesome. And the main reason why I decided to use Keep It instead of Devonthink is the saved search feature and how it works alongside the other systems present in Keep It. So in Keep It, you can, just like in Devonthink or in Files, for example, you can save any kind of document. You can save web archives. You can do that natively on the Mac, and with a workaround on iOS, there's a workflow that you can use. You can save images, PDF documents. You can save videos. You can save anything you want. You can throw it in Keep It. And then you can tag files. You can label them. The label is like a visual colored indicator that makes a file stand out.
Okay.
You can add comments. You can see properties. You can do all kinds of things with metadata. And all these pieces of metadata you can then use as parameters for saved searches. So say that you want to create a saved search for, I don't know, JPEG images that belong in a folder and have been tagged with iOS 12. You can put together that saved search and it'll show you just that subset of items that match those criteria. And all of these saved searches can appear in the sidebar on the iPad, in the main view on the iPhone, and also on the sidebar of the Mac version. And that alone was the main feature that convinced me that I wanted to use Keep It for the App Store anniversary project and the iOS 12 review. Because those are big projects with lots of different kinds of information and documents going on at the same time.
Right.
Web links, web archives, PDFs, screenshots, videos. And I wanted to have a more flexible structure to be able to navigate different kinds of items without having to store them each in a different folder. So to give you an example, because it sounds more practical, right now I have, for example, in my Keep It sidebar, I got shortcuts, which is a saved search for anything that is tagged shortcuts. But also I have shortcuts docs, which is just basically PDF documents that also are tagged shortcuts. I have iOS 12 documentation, which is PDF documents or web archives that have been tagged with iOS 12. I have an archive of all the MacStories weekly newsletters, which is actually based on whether a PDF document is tagged weekly and contains the word weekly in the file name. You can do all kinds of things like this.
Yeah.
And it gives you more freedom because you don't have to worry about folders. That is, a file can be only one folder. So you can apply multiple tags to items. You can apply a label, and then you can do saved searches. And there's other features of the app that I really like, and that the more I throw into Keep It in terms of quantity of items and types of items, the more I can appreciate this flexibility. So for example, just this week, the app was updated with a new search engine for extracting text from PDF documents.
Oh, nice.
So all these hundreds of PDF documents that I threw into Keep It are now fully searchable. And of course, I can also create saved searches. So for example, I could have a saved search that shows me all of the MacStories weekly issues where I mentioned Spotify, for example.
Right.
And also there's a Ike's callback automation has been added just this week to the app. So you can create text, you can save photos into the app, you can append text to notes, because that's also a thing that you can do in Keep It. You can have plain text, markdown, or rich text notes. The best way that I can describe Keep It is as a combination of an Apple app-like files or mail, and I don't want to say simplified in a negative way, but a more approachable version of Devonthink
Mm-hmm.
that has saved searches on iOS. Really, that is the best feature on iOS, the ability to have all of these different searches going on. And it's not perfect because it's, the drag and drop support could be improved. Keyboard shortcuts on iPad could be improved. There's no SiriKit support yet. I hope that's in the works for iOS 12. And in general, I think the Mac app is still a little more flexible than the iPad one, despite, the iPad Pro being such a large screen. It still feels like the developer could do more. But
Right.
I feel very optimistic about working on the iOS Store review and, in Keep It, because the App Store project has gone so well. And I think it'll go just as well with the review.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I got a couple questions for you. One, you mentioned that there's a workflow for dealing with web archives. Are you using the X callback scheme for that?
No, it's actually very interesting. The developer of Keep It told me about this. And this doesn't just work with Keep It, it works with anything else on iOS. So there's no native way to generate web archives on iOS.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out it just takes 2 actions in shortcuts or workflow. You just need to make a workflow or a shortcut that accepts URLs from web pages. And then all you need to do is use get contents of web page. And then the second action is get file of type. And in the type text field, you just need to type com.apple.webarchive, and it'll extract the web archive version of the web page for you. I had no idea this was possible.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Just 2 actions, and you can end up with a web archive on your device. And then, of course, you can just use opening and send it to whatever you like.
Okay, so how does it then deal with things like tweets? Because one thing I find is I'm on Twitter and I'll find someone who's mentioned some obscure new feature of Mojave or something that's coming up, and I want to save the tweet. And the one thing that I really like about Notes is I can get a nice little preview of the tweet, and you can't really do that anywhere else. I assume you can't and Keep It either, right?
Well, I'm trying right now so that I can tell you. Let's see if I save the web archive. Let's see what happens. It's getting the contents of the page. It's running within Tweetbot. Let's see. We have a web archive, and sure enough, it's the mobile version of Twitter. Yeah, if I put it in airplane mode, it doesn't work. So it's kind of this is the mobile Twitter website that I think they're doing something with JavaScript. So it's not a real offline web archive. I'm sorry, John. You still gotta use.
All right.
I think actually iMessage as the best previews for.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I misspoke. I mean iMessage. There's really no good way to deal with collecting tweets. It drives me a little bananas because what would be nice too is even with something like Keep It or anything else would be to simultaneously save the text and the link. I guess I could do this with a workflow, but save the text and then save the link so you have both together. You wouldn't get the nice preview, but at least you get the contents and the URL.
I want to try some real-time follow-up and see if I save the desktop version of Twitter, if it maybe works, because the mobile one is kind of strange.
Right.
No, it still creates the mobile version. So yeah, no good way to save tweets. There's a couple of dedicated utilities, I think, for collecting tweets. I think we mentioned, what's the name, Charm before.
Yeah, Charm's good.
There's also the bookmarks feature in the Twitter app, but you got to use the official Twitter client. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd rather use Charm.
Yeah,
at least because it has a good share sheet extension.
Yeah. Any other questions about Keep It?
No, I don't think so. think so.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted on AppStories and the club because I still see it as an experiment, but I think it's going really well. And developer is really responsive, and of course he's been working on Together and then Keep It for such a long time. I suppose it's the only thing he works on. So it's good to see this kind of indie product still going strong and still adopting new iOS features.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by iTube Downloader. iTube Downloader for the Mac lets you download YouTube videos, channels, and entire playlists with just a few clicks. Downloading your favorite videos from YouTube shouldn't be hard. iTube Downloader makes it incredibly easy with a clean UI. The app has a built-in dedicated YouTube browser. Find the video you want and click download, and you're in business. It's just that easy. At the same time, iTube Downloader has an enormous number of powerful features under the hood. It supports subtitles and captions. You can download 4K video where it's available. The app supports high frame rate videos, so you can watch those 60 frame per second videos as intended. You can set whatever YouTube page you want as the home page too. And you can specify a default download folder and whether the app should copy content to iTunes. One of my favorite features, though, is the browser extension. There are browser extensions for both Safari and Chrome, which makes it easy to quickly download a video you see, whether or not you're browsing your videos in iTube Downloader. On top of that, if you just want audio from a video, you can download that too. What's more, with a single purchase, you get a lifetime of updates, and the app will run on up to 10 Macs, which is a great deal. I've got a special deal just for listeners. Get 10% off with the offer code AppStories18. That's AppStories and the number 18. Just use that at checkout and get your discount. Again, it's AppStories18, and the offer is good until July 25th, so go download it now. We'll include a link in the show notes, too. Thanks again to iTube Downloader for supporting the show.
So I thought we would also talk a little bit about task management. I mean, I don't want to go deep into things because, we've talked about that and we both use it, but there are a couple of different aspects of task management that I wanted to mention. The first is, as I was getting ready to leave for London, I felt like there were certain things that had to be done before I left, and I found my normal task management system to be a little bit of a distraction because I'd kind of go through and look at what was due today, look what was coming up tomorrow. It became a way to procrastinate and kind of fiddle with. So I did something that I do every now and then, which is I went to task paper and I just created a really simple list. It was like by day, right? So I had I think I did this about 7 days before I left town. And I had each day listed in order. And I listed each of the things that I had, and these were only the things that absolutely had to be done on those days. I would go to things still once or twice a day at the beginning and the end of the day, but I'd close it otherwise. And I'd work my way through each of those tasks each day. And if something didn't get done, I'd find a place to bump it down the list into another day. But it kept me from, I think, freaking out a little bit that I was procrastinating and moving too many things down the list, and gave me a little bit of a sense of satisfaction of seeing that stuff ticked off, because it uses kind of a strike-through visual on the Mac that you can see as you got things finished. And it was just nice to know that here are the 4 or 5 things I absolutely have to get done on Tuesday. Here's what I'm going to get done on Wednesday, and so on and so forth, and get those done and kind of close off all the other distractions for that week before I left.
Let me ask you this. What do you do this on the Mac? Can you do task paper on iOS? Do you use any specific app to do this?
Yeah, I use it really on the Mac. And the downside of that is that, I mean, there are task paper implementations on iOS like Taskmater, but I've been on, for this particular project, I've been on my Mac most days anyway, because I've been editing all the episodes of App Stories that we've been doing. And so it wasn't really something where I had to have it on both. And so I didn't. I just kept it on the Mac. I think normally that would have been that's a restriction that keeps me from using task paper regularly. I haven't really found an iOS version that I like enough to use it as a regular task management system. But if I'm going to be on my Mac for several hours a day anyway, having task paper open and being able to switch to it and tick things off was fine for this project. So the other thing too, Federico, I wanted to mention are alarms and reminders. And I've started using reminders more often, and it's for, I don't know, it feels a little silly, but sometimes I'll get up in the morning. This week has been a week of getting up in the morning and publishing our App Stories interviews every morning at like noon GMT. So I'll get up and I'll start working on some article that I'm writing. And it's very easy, I find, when I'm editing to get lost in the article and forget, and then look up and it's like, oh, I should have published that, 20 minutes ago. So I've been using Siri just to set myself quick little reminders to go off like 10 minutes before publication time, so I know to stop writing and just switch gears and publish the episode. That's the main thing I've been doing this week as we get all those shows out.
I don't use reminders as my main task manager, but I appreciate the fact that when you create a reminder, which you can do easily with Siri on the iPhone or the HomePod, for example, the syntax required is much less cumbersome than using a third-party task manager. But when you create a reminder with due date and time, the reminder tends to stick around on your lock screen, which it's not something that third-party apps can do. Reminders does. It just can sort of just float over there and bug you until you mark it as complete, which is a great way to not forget to walk the dogs or publish an important article or something like that.
Yeah, it works well on the Mac too, the same kind of way, where the little notification comes up in the corner and it just sits there in the corner of your eye until you do something about it. So I use it very sparingly because I don't like that sort of interruption, but there are things that have to happen at a particular time, and for me, that's a good way to get it done.
We also use Trello. I think we should mention Trello because we use it all the time when it comes to planning, for example, the busiest months of the year on MacStories. And we also use Trello this time with the editorial calendar, which is a board that we have on Trello, but where we constantly refresh with new lists. In this case, we had individual lists for each day of the week for the App Store anniversary event. And on each day, we had cards for the article or multiple articles that we wanted to publish on MacStories and the episode of AppStories that we wanted to publish, as well as sponsor information. And also, we use the editorial calendar, as I mentioned, for example, for WWDC or for September, when we're dealing with lots of different stories happening all at once, whether it's an OS review or an overview or multiple app reviews by the same writer. I think it's really useful to have this sort of bird's eye view of dozens of assignments, which we can easily make out thanks to labels or member profile pictures. I like the way that, I can open the editorial board in Trello and I can see at a glance who's working on what and what the progress is like.
Right. Yeah, that's been really helpful. And I found it especially useful as we were leading up to WWDC because we had an unusual number of app updates this year. And we did the same kind of thing with the days of the week as we led up to WWDC. And because each of us were talking to different developers about different apps and the timelines were shifting and everything, whoever was working on something could go in and just move the card over to the date if the launch date changed and that kind of thing. And we got a good sense of what the load was both on the individual writers, but also for the individual days, how much was going to be coming out that day.
Right. Yeah. Of course, we also use Slack to coordinate with the team. We have multiple channels. We pay for Slack, so we have full text search, or we can look back into the archives, which I use all the time when I forget if I made a promise to someone or if someone said they were going to take care of a particular story or assignment. So yeah, I think, we have a small team, but still we see tons of value in Slack, especially when it gets really busy and we're exchanging hundreds of messages on a daily basis. It's something that wouldn't be possible. I know because I tried many years ago, back before John or Ryan or Alex were part of MacStories. We tried to make it work on iMessage, and it just was a nightmare. So ever since we're using Slack, even though the apps are not perfect, it's so much better for team communication.
Yeah, it really is. Anytime you've got more than two people, it makes a lot of sense to use Slack.
I wanted to let you quickly describe, John, because you took the lead on this side of the project, what the interview setup was like for AppStories.
Yeah, it was definitely different than the typical AppStories episode because we were dealing with, first of all, there was scheduling and dealing with people around the world to interview. So that was done primarily through Spark and you. And when I wanted you to know about something, we used the new sharing feature so that you could see what was going on. And that was a way for me to kind of get dates from people and then check with your schedule and make sure that it was okay with your schedule and my schedule, and then finalize dates. And that worked really well. I was really happy with that. We also had a shared document where we put together interview questions, and I was glad that we did that in a separate doc. We use Google Docs for the show normally, and that will work on our show notes in there. But having a separate document worked really well because we had a list of every single episode in the order they were going to appear and all the people who we were going to talk to. And then we would create the questions. And because some episodes had overlap in terms of topics, it was helpful to be able to see all that in one place and maybe ask similar or identical questions of some of the guests that we had on the show. So that all worked really well. What was really different, though, was the production side, because usually a typical episode is your track, my track, and then I usually do a separate track for the sponsor read. So that's 3 tracks, but we talked to 2 people on some episodes, so that was 2 extra tracks. Plus, you and I usually recorded the intro and the outro separately. So it was a lot more audio files to deal with. And so I really ended up just using a combination of the Finder and Dropbox to create folders for each specific show, get naming conventions for everybody's files, and then I used the color labels you can use in the Finder to mark which files had been dealt with in some way or another. It was a good way to keep track of that I had everything and that which files had been processed and which ones hadn't, because it was more time consuming too when I do the audio processing. Our 3 tracks that are in a normal episode will process at the same time. But once you add like 5 or 6 tracks with the MacBook Pro I've got, it can't do them all at once. So it'll do 3 at a time, I think, or 4 at a time. And then it'll go to the next ones. So that was a little more time consuming. And I had to kind of plan for that to make sure I had that all in place and then could start editing in Logic.
All right, so let me ask you this to sort of round up this episode about how we deal with big projects and launching and organizing big projects. Is there anything you'd like to solve in your setup for the things we will have to do in September?
That's a good question. And it's something that I don't feel like I've had enough time to really think about yet because we're not entirely through the anniversary project.
Yeah.
But I do think that I would like to come up with an even better solution for how I deal with research materials, because I found myself, despite having the good search capabilities of DevonThink, that worked really great for me. However, I did find myself kind of touching those articles more than I would like to, and going back and looking for things. I think I could do with a little better organization of the materials that I find over time, so that, which is why I think your Keep It system it's intriguing to me. I want to take a look at it and see if maybe that works for what I might do. But I'd like to find a way to organize my research a little better. How about you?
Yeah, I mostly have the same problem, and that is why I'm playing around with Keep It. One of my struggles last year was being able to reconcile the notes that I was taking about iOS 11 and putting together, or actually bringing together the notes and the research material, because I ended up in a situation where for example, I was organizing screenshots about features, and I was forgetting about the fact that I took those screenshots. And a couple of weeks later, I was taking notes about a feature that I had already saved somewhere, but I had forgotten about.
Right.
And so when I was finalizing the review, I found myself dealing with duplicated content for screenshots where I added a comment about this is a neat feature of iOS 11, and also a note from a couple of weeks later saying this is a neat feature of iOS 11, because I didn't know how I was organizing and saving that different type of material. And I think the problem was that the folder structure was pushing me to forget more easily about these files, the screenshots and these notes. And I think with tagging and saved searches, it'll be easier for me to have everything under control. But I guess we'll have to follow up in a couple of months and see how it's gone.
Yeah, I think we will. I mean, that is one of the hardest things when you are dealing with an enormous amount of information. And I know I felt that with this project because there were a lot of articles in that database. Well, I think that that's probably a good place to stop, Federico.
Yeah.
I want to thank our sponsors again, Casper and iTube Downloader, for making this episode possible. And as always, you can find both me and Federico writing over at MacStories.net. And you can find Federico on Twitter. He's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.